Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna 'ilman yuqarribuna minka bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla wa anta ya hayyu ya qayyum taj'alul hazna idha shi'ta sahlan sahla. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most kind, salutations and greetings be upon our Master Muhammad, the Messenger of Allah, his family and companions. O Allah, nothing is easy except that which you make easy. And if you wish, O the ever-living, the self-subsisting, you can make the difficult easy. O Allah, we ask you to teach us that which will benefit us and to benefit us through what you have already taught us and increase us in knowledge which will bring us closer to you. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ الْعَلِيِّ الْعَظِيمِ وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَى سَيِّدِنَا مُحَمَّدٍ وَعَلَى آلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ أَجْمَعِينَ وَبَعْدُ. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to our next lesson on the Book of Knowledge from Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences of Imam Abu Hamid Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. Today's topic, Imam Ghazali talks about, is the changing of words. Last week's lesson was about blameworthy knowledge and why is knowledge blameworthy? Why is learning something wrong and what sciences are wrong to learn, etc. The principles behind that. Today we're talking about a section of that, a follow-on from that, which is terminology, words, and how we understand words and how things can change over time. In fact, today, I think it was today or yesterday, I can't remember, I saw a few Twitter exchanges, like you do. Most of you don't know what Twitter is. You know what Facebook is. And basically it was just about two random guys talking about empires and all this kind of thing, and the subjects, the servants, the people in the empire, the leaders, the relationship between everything, and how empires are built and destroyed, and this history and sociology kind of thing. And one of these in the exchange, he said to the person who was trying to be clever and sounded clever, mashallah, but internet can be deceiving. And he kind of stumped him on the question. He said he'd been doing research on empires. So he asked him the question. He goes, "What did you define as empire before you started your research?" Yeah, because you're researching into the word empire. What are you looking at? You're looking at anything that says empire on the book, on the research, or is there a meaning to empire that you're looking for? So the reply showed quite the reality. He goes, empire is a word that changes over time and it's got this kind of meaning and application. He didn't answer the question. He kind of went around answering the question because it proved he didn't have a definition to his so-called research. He's on Twitter. We don't know what he's talking about. He's just claiming things, right? But and then, by the way, when people do like their research in masters and PhDs, they actually have to define the thing they're researching in. And sometimes it's a very kind of specific, very detailed sort of aspect of something very large, right? It might do something like very detailed in science, in bacteria or something, but they'll give you a very specific scope, sphere of what they're going to actually talk about in their research, in their paper, right? So this is the thing we're going to be talking about today. Words that if you hear them, what do you think? What is the natural human reaction today? And it will differ from person to person. What do we understand from words and terminology? So the principle is what we want to learn from today. It's really important because we're going to be reading books, we're going to be reading, internet, we're going to be hearing speeches, we're going to be listening to people criticize things or praise things, using certain terms. And here I'm using the word terms and terminology because there are linguistical meaning to words which we can all understand, and the dictionary defines them. Okay? That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about words used as terms. So when we say, for instance, something like, medicine, right? Medicine's got its linguistical interpretation, but if I do medicine today, you think, you study at university. That's one understanding of medicine as a term. But somebody else could think, are you talking about herbal medicine? Because that's what I'm studying, right? I thought you were referring to that. So you might say, I've looked into Greek medicine, whatever, right? So when you use the term medicine, it has its different applications other than its linguistical, meaning in the dictionary. So we're talking about terms as applied in certain circumstances. And where do terms come from? They come from agreements. Like you say, I've come to terms with things. We're on terms, right? What does it mean? We are in agreement. So the word, that's where the word term comes from, basically. Terminology comes from that meaning. That a terminology is what some people, not everyone, what some people agreed to give that usage of that word to. So they said, look, the word, let's think of a good example for this. I should have prepared a good example. Let's take the word soccer, because football in the UK, isn't it? So some people, Americans basically, they took the word soccer and they applied it. So we don't agree with them, do we? In the UK, we don't agree with that terminology, that usage of their language, right? So, and they applied it to a particular sport that there's 22 players with a referee, they kick a ball up and down a football field with certain lines and rules, and that's soccer, right? In the UK, and most of the rest of the world, they use the word football, right? And it's the same concept, but that's the terminology that they agreed on to use for that sport when it was invented, right? So that word was not a word in the dictionary from language. It was a word that came into the dictionary when that thing came about, right? So a lot of words come into the dictionary. Somebody sent me a video of Bismillah as an English word and countdown. I don't know if anybody's seen that. Somebody showed me a countdown. Have you seen it for him? So somebody sent me this video where at the end, what's it called, that last thing they do, very last thing in countdown, we have the mixed words, right? I forgot what it's called. And then you have to guess what it's mixed up, basically. So it might say, like, I don't know, fossil fuel, but actually you've mixed it up, it's something like, forever slave, I don't know, random example. So the word they had was like, I don't know what it was, but it actually made the word Bismillah. So I was saying this in the class, one of the other classes the other day, I don't know if he was here, that there are words now that in English dictionary that are actually from Arabic. So I think Bismillah is one of them, because the person sent me that video. I said, is this true or is this made up? Because you can always edit the things. You got to be careful. These are what you believe and what you just accept on social media and messages and stuff. So I was like, is this real? Because anybody could have made that up, and they could have used random words that they sound like they're saying them. And he goes, no, it's real. I was like, I'm not sure. But he goes, no, it's real. I goes, okay then. Bismillah is a word in the English dictionary, right? That's what it is, right? What does it mean? In the name of Allah, to start in the name of Allah, etc. But so I mentioned that. But to go back to the point, there's these terminologies that have been used or been placed to a certain meaning, an application to a thing that people have agreed upon. Now, what Imam Ghazali talks about is the misusage, the misunderstanding, the kind of wrong agreement, basically, or the agreement's been changed because other people took over and they pushed it towards other meanings. But if you go back in history, that term, or you change it to a different group of people, let's say, at the same time, that term will have a different meaning and understanding. And this is a very, very important aspect of Islam, because Islam, the sciences of Islam, are made up of various terminologies, various words throughout, and those words, if misunderstood, can give you a completely incorrect understanding of Islam, of a certain aspect of our religion or our practices, and therefore we need to understand terminology correctly. It's a massive thing, right? It's a really important thing to learn definitions of words, the correct definitions of words, and that's what Imam Ghazali talks about today, inshallah. So we're going to be talking about. So what are these words that Imam Ghazali himself is going to talk about today? We're going to cover 5 words, and within that we'll discuss a lot of other things as well. Number 1, fiqh, the word fiqh, right? You all heard the word fiqh, right? Put your hand up if you haven't heard of this word, you don't know what fiqh, this word fiqh. No? You've not heard this word?
I've heard it.
Yep.
Would it be best possible to describe it just briefly?
That's what we're going to do. So Imam Ghazali is going to describe the word, the incorrect understanding and the correct understanding. But you have an understanding. If you've heard it, you will have your own understanding currently. Let's see what Imam Ghazali tells us. The second word that he goes through is ilm. Ilm, the common translation of ilm would be knowledge. Okay, a simple translation of fiqh would be understanding. Tawheed is the third word. Tawheed, I'm sure we all know that refers to oneness of God. But let's see what Imam Ghazali talks about. Number 4, he mentions as dhikr or tadhkir. So dhikr would be remembrance, mentioning something. Obviously, remembrance of Allah, most likely. We're going to look into it. And tadhkir means reminding others, right? Almost like admonishment and that kind of thing. Reminding other people. And the 5th word is hikmah. Hikmah, in a simple translation, would be wisdom. So what does the word wisdom refer to? And how do people understand these words? So we already have, without going into any kind of explanation of these words, we all probably, those of you who've come across these words before, will have some sort of an understanding, right? That's your understanding. Let's talk about what Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, talks about. So this section, he actually entitles it like trying to figure out or determining what names of ulum, sciences, have been changed, right? So these refer to practices and sciences and fields of practice rather than just random words. It says here, the all names of praiseworthy sciences. So originally they were named of praiseworthy sciences. There's translations given here. So the translator here has translated fiqh as jurisprudence, ilm as the science of religion, tawheed as theology, tadhkir and dhikr as admonition, and hikmah as philosophy. Right? That's just a translation of a translator. You know, I gave a slightly different translation. But he does mention here, Imam Ghazali does mention that these are all praiseworthy sciences, all praiseworthy practices, fields of knowledge and learning that were there in the past. And those who held these sciences, practiced them, were respected, were, you know, highly valued people. But what's happened now is they've been altered. Now, when we say now, what do we mean by now? Who can explain now?
Is it his era?
That's right. In the not now like today in Manchester, in Cheetham Hill. No. Now as in Imam Ghazali is saying now as in. So when was Imam Ghazali around? What kind of era was his era?
13th century.
CE. Yeah. I work on AH.
Sorry.
Yeah, but if you go back,
700,
if you go back 900 years, if you go back 900 years, Imam Ghazali was around. Is it? Yeah, it was around 450, so actually 1,000 more or less. 950 years ago, Imam Ghazali, lunar years was around, so probably about 900 solar years, right? Yeah, about 900 years ago, Imam Ghazali. Sorry.
So was it intended as, even though he says that particular time he wrote the book, was it acknowledgement that it's constantly being abused and changed, so this is why it's relevant for us?
Yeah, so we'll figure it out today what we think about these terms and other terms. I mean, Imam Ghazali mentions 5. I'm sure there might be other terms that we now have a misunderstanding of or that are being used in a particular, even amongst Muslims themselves, let alone amongst non-Muslims that have now obviously, due to the global world we're in, they talk about Islamic terms and words that have now confused everyone almost. So yeah, in his time, they now, in his time, have a different connotation, have a different application. So the first term, let's go through them one by one and try to understand what has happened, right, or what happened then. So the first term to be affected, to be changed and misunderstood was fiqh. And I mentioned to you last week that one way of distorting something is by limiting it, by restriction. So we say that, you know, fiqh is just this, fiqh is just, and we don't take the whole concept of fiqh, or a translation of jurisprudence, but Imam Ghazali doesn't translate it like that or give it that meaning even. So he says, in his time, it became limited, restricted to the knowledge of, legal stuff, law, basically, minute details, proofs, discussions into fiqh, fiqh, as we even say it now, right? Because that's kind of what we think when we hear the word fiqh. I'm sure pretty much all of you are thinking, when we say fiqh, the rules of salah, rules of namaz, or the rules of halal and haram is fiqh, right? The rules of commerce and, the rules of your zakat, let's say, or your hajj rules. These are all part of fiqh, and that's the case today. That's what it's used for. And Ghazali goes to mention that it says here it was used for excessive disputation and the memorization and, kind of spreading of just loads and loads of opinions. Yeah, Imam so-and-so said this, Imam so-and-so said. The more you know about what the ulama, or we say the fuqaha as we call them, the jurists, they say about these issues, the more fiqh knowledge you have. That's what people think. But, he says, this is not what this word meant in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not what the Sahaba understood the word fiqh to mean. This is not how it was understood. And therefore, and here's the most important part, whenever the word fiqh was used in the Quran or the Sunnah, because it's used, it's a common word. If you think it means this, and you go back to the Quran and Sunnah, and you start thinking, oh look, they're talking about fiqh here, talking about Islamic law. No, it's not. When you hear the word fiqh in the Quran or in the Hadith, and you just automatically think Islamic law, that's the problem. That's what Imam Ghazali is warning us about. Don't take this and superimpose it back in the early days. No, let's go back to the early days and figure out what they actually used this term for, and you'll find it wasn't for that. And that's genuinely 100% the case. The word fiqh, as in many hadith, and Imam Ghazali quotes certain hadith and passages of the Quran to show you the meaning of faqhuha, which I said understanding, my translation was understanding, which is more of a linguistical translation, comprehension, understanding. It was applied, he says here, to the science, to the ilm, the knowledge of the tariq al-akhirah, the path to the next world. So when we said somebody had fiqh, we meant that they knew how to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, get to the next life with worship, with obedience, with understanding, and the subtle defects of the soul, right? So to know how to purify the soul and the heart. The influences of which render works corrupt. So not fiqh as in this is incorrect practice. No, this is an incorrect state of heart to be in. Your practice is worthless because of this state of heart, right? The influences which render works corrupt, the thorough realization of the inferiority of this life. This life is not the be-all and end-all, it's just a transitional period for the eternal life in the hereafter, and that's part of this fiqh. If you have fiqh, you have this understanding. And the domination of fear over the heart. This is indicated by the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran when He said, so I'm going to quote you the ayah in the Quran inshallah. I've jumped, sorry, at the end where I was reading earlier. So here it is, the first one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لهم قلوب لا يفقهون بها. لهم قلوب لا يفقهون بها. They have hearts with which they do not understand. They don't understand. They don't have fiqh. They have hearts which they don't understand laws of, halal and haram. They have hearts which don't have this understanding which Imam Ghazali just mentioned, that what this life is about. There's a path, this is a means to the end. It's the akhirah that we've got to prepare for. Where is my state of heart? What am I up to? Although in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does mention the word fiqh for the concept of teaching people, not necessarily the laws, but teaching people. And in this regard, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in Surah At-Tawbah, Surah number 9, the translation of which I'll give, because I can't read this writing sometimes, it's old school, don't make a mistake in the Quran. And it's a very famous ayah, to be honest. And it's about the fiqh that we think is fiqh, to be honest, which Allah says in the Quran that when you all go out for an expedition, when you go out for an expedition, then let some of you remain behind. لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ In that they may gain understanding. Tafaqquh is a derivative of fiqh, which means to gain deeper understanding and knowledge of ad-deen, the religion. And that when the others return, the people that have gone out, that didn't learn, right? They didn't get the chance to learn and study and understand. They've gone out and done other things. It's an important role, whatever they've done. And they come back, that the people who've studied and learned and understood, they may warn, لِيُنذِرُوا, they may warn those that return. And that they may take admonishment and, benefit in their deen, in other words, right? So this is quite often used, and I think we may have had it before as well, to say that there's people that need to learn the rules of Islam and the fiqh and the halal haram, because there's certain people that don't know them. They're going to come and ask, and they need scholars, and we need people to teach them. So we need people studying Islam and so forth. But it doesn't say the laws of Islam in the Quran. It says لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, that they may understand the religion, right? And they may warn those that come back. So understanding this word, if we now take fiqh to mean laws, they say learn the laws and warn them of halal and haram. It's an interpretation, and it can be taken that way. Imam Ghazali says, jurisprudence is really what brings about a warning in the heart, which is a fear rather than the details of, and he mentions this, because of divorce and freedom from slavery, manumission, ataq, financial contracts, hire and renting, leasing, etc., which produce neither warning nor fear. So he's saying don't think that this ayah is referring to just the laws of Islam. On the contrary, to devote oneself exclusively to these things hardens the heart. Just learning these rules, constantly learning books of fiqh and masail, it doesn't benefit you in reality. It doesn't make your iman stronger necessarily. It doesn't really give the heart anything to work with. It can be very dry and boring, but it can be very enjoyable because people like that kind of stuff. But is that really what Allah wanted us to do, just learn these masail? No, Imam Ghazali says, right? It may even remove fear from the heart. And I've experienced this because I've been on this path, that learning the religion to a very deep level, this type, the fiqh, it really hardens, it does harden the heart. It makes you find, like it almost leads to, it can lead to immorality, that you don't have a big regard for the law, the spirit of the law. You don't have any, you don't want to apply it, you just want to learn it. You just know it, you don't apply it. This is really how bad it gets. This is something that we've seen firsthand and we seek refuge from, that affects us. And learning the deen isn't for this, right? Learning those rules is not for that. But learning them alone and isolating the understanding of fiqh to that and just studying Islam to that is dangerous, right? And this is exactly what we now see in those who have so devoted themselves to this study. Imam Ghazali talking about his times. So what is fiqh then? So we've mentioned this fiqh, but where does he get this understanding from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the Prophet said in the hadith, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, the Prophet said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for a slave of his, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good, man yuridillahu bi khayran, whoever Allah wants khayr for, good for, yufaqqihhu fid deen, he gives him understanding of the religion, gives him fiqh of the religion. وَإِنَّمَا أَنَا الْقَاسِمُ, and I am but the distributor, I give. وَاللَّهُ الْمُعْطِي, and Allah is I am the distributor, Allah is the provider, Allah is the giver, Allah is one that gives. And the Prophet is the one that distributes amongst the creation, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Sa'id ibn Ibrahim was asked, which of the people of Medina he thought had the most fiqh? Who was afqahu Ahl al-Madinah? Who was the most fiqh in Ahl al-Madinah? And he replied, the one who fears Allah the most. That's what fiqh was to him. It wasn't who knows more religious or laws of Islam, but he understood it as understanding, as piety, as the fruits of your learning and your practices of your worship, rather than the knowledge and understanding of legal opinions and so forth. When Anas ibn Malik related the following words of the Prophet ﷺ, I prefer sitting in the company of men who praise God from sunset until sunrise to the setting free of 4 slaves. So, doing dhikr and remembering Allah rather than freeing slaves. He turned to Yazid al-Raqahi and Ziyad al-Numayn, who were 2 students of his sitting there, and said, our meetings of invocation, our meetings of dhikr were different from your present gatherings in which one of you talks sermons, mentions stuff before his friends and mentions the hadith, the traditions. We used to sit and ponder over the articles of faith, study the meanings of the Quran, enlighten ourselves with the matters of religion, and enumerate the blessings of God upon us. So this was, Sayyidina Anas, as understanding of fiqh, understanding of what learning was in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It wasn't merely admonition and masail, or masail as in fiqh rulings. It was something very much deeper than that. There's a story mentioned here. Al-Hasan al-Basri was once asked by Farqad as-Sabakhi, who was a student or somebody around him, his opinion on something. It doesn't mention what it was. So he asked him his opinion on something, and he gave his answer. Farqad replied, the fiqh of this, or the jurisprudence, the jurists disagree with you. The fuqaha, the fiqh of this is disagree with you. Imam Hasan al-Basri said, may your mother be bereft of you, may you lose your mother, basically. You know, it's a kind of way of telling somebody off, rebuking someone. Have you ever seen with your own eyes a real jurist? I'm trying to think the word jurist here is the translation here, but it's a real faqih. Have you ever seen somebody who has real understanding? Because he was referring to the word faqih as a jurist. Like, this is not what the jurists say. So Imam Hassan Basri said, have you ever really seen a faqih in your life? Have your eyes ever fallen upon a real faqih, you know, a real person of understanding of religion? Meaning you're using the word to refer to somebody who's talking about laws and so forth. But in reality, a faqih is somebody as much more than that. Then he went on to explain, he defined, you know, in his opinion, what a faqih, somebody with fiqh, was. He said, verily, the faqih, the one with understanding, is he who has forsaken the world and seeks the hereafter, who understands the importance of his deen, his religion, persists in the worship of his Lord, is pious, restrains himself from attacking the reputation of his fellow Muslims, and abstains, or keeps his hand away from their riches, and somebody who gives them sincere advice. Right? And if you look at all of that, not one statement there said, and he knows the laws of religion, and he gives them fatwa, and he gives them, he said, so this is a real person of understanding, the one who's working for his akhirah, the one who's looking after his limbs, not sinning with them, and advising the Muslims, and being good to the Muslims. And he continues in this vein, in this kind of, similar, he quotes many other sort of incidents or statements of the scholars that talk about fiqh. So from that brief kind of summarization, we should understand the word fiqh in terms of the Prophet ﷺ and the early Muslims. They didn't, in the hadith, in the Quran, they didn't use it to mean legal rulings. They used it to mean deep understanding of this religion. One other hadith to mention is the Prophet ﷺ, and we had this before as well, خيركم في الإسلام خيركم في الجاهلية. The best of you in Islam, when the companions became Muslim, are the best of you, or the best of you who are those who were the best in the pre-Islamic period of Jahiliyyah. But the Prophet added a condition: إِذَا فَقُهُ, if they have understanding. He didn't mean if they learnt the rules of prayer and legal laws, but if they have understanding of religion, if they have understanding of their purpose in life and what Allah wants from them, and they work towards that as well. And the second term, let's move on to other terms because we're limited in time, let's get to it, al-ilm. And ilm is just a term that means knowledge, and translated as knowledge or sciences, a discipline. And it used to be applied, as mentioned by Imam Ghazali, to the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his attributes, Allah's miracles in his creation, how Allah works, how Allah, how things happen in life, the creation of Allah, the wildlife, the trees, and so forth. And when Umar ibn Khattab who died, Ibn Mas'ud, one of the companions, exclaimed, pronounced, verily 9/10 of ilm have passed away. 9/10 of knowledge have gone. He wasn't talking about 9/10 of the fiqh, because the fiqh was still there, the rulings were still there, all the outward sciences he was talking about this deep understanding of how Allah wants people to work, how things are going on in life. Sayyidina Umar was a master in that, right? So he used it to mean the knowledge of Allah, his attributes, and the creation, and how Allah works in creation, I should say, right? So what was it used for before? Like, what was ilm before? So who was the alim? So we had the fiqh and the faqih. You have the ilm and the alim. Ilm, knowledge; alim, scholar. That's common translation. So Imam Ghazali says the alim in his time now, moving on to what it's used for, was somebody who was a master of debate. He's a alim because he can hold himself in a debate. Right? You can debate somebody, he's a alim now. He's knowledgeable, he's a scholar. It says here in this translation, until it became commonly applied to those who debate cases of jurisprudence and the like with adversaries, and are dubbed learned in the truth, deeply learned in the truth, versatile in knowledge, while those do not practice that nor take you up are numbered among the weak. So if you don't debate, if you don't have this great versatility, knowledge, and so forth, and are not considered to be among the company of the ulama, the learned. Again, this understanding is a misunderstanding, a restriction to the term to one aspect. He says here, but most of what has been said regarding the excellence of learning and the learned relates to the learned in Allah, His commands, His actions, and His attributes. His actions as in His acts in creation, and his attributes as in descriptions, like learning about Allah through the Quranic passages, learning about Allah through what the Prophet said about him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And again, he just goes on to repeat that now it's being used for the sciences of the law, and providing proofs and arguments and so forth. The third term, so quickly moving on, that was not too dissimilar to fiqh itself, but slightly different. The third term to suffer or go through alteration is tawheed. And this is an important one, because tawheed even now, some people may misunderstand tawheed and think it's aqidah, or think it's, debates on the oneness of God. And that's what Imam Ghazali says. Tawheed became known in his time as debates, but in theology. So it became basically ilm al-kalam. That's another word for it, but that's what tawheed became known as. What's ilm al-kalam? Like scholastic theology, they call it, or theology, basically. Scholastic theology as in arguments, putting your arguments back and forth, proofs, in a very formal manner as well, by the way, right? Not just emotional arguments, very formal type of arguments with rules and settings and etiquettes and so forth. So again, a form of argumentation, a form of debate, a form of this kind of discussion-based kind of thing. And whoever was good at debating in those areas was called somebody who had great tawheed, right? And even goes on to criticize a group that called themselves Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed, a group of the deviant Muslims. I think it was the Mu'tazilites. I'm not 100% sure. They are, yes, as it says here in the note. They were the Mu'tazilites, as mentioned by Shahrastani in Al-Milal wa Nihal, which is a book on the sect. So one of the early sects of Islam was the rationalists. They took on the Greek tradition and the logic and so forth. So they called themselves Ahlul Adli wa Tawheed, which means the people of Adl, justice, equity, sometimes the better translation, equality, as they say, right? And Tawheed. And the people of Tawheed, i.e. oneness, those believe in oneness or unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in reality, and this is very important to mention, the learned men at the time of the Prophet ﷺ who had Tawheed were not at all concerned about any disputations, any arguments, any proofs. If we look at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, what was Tawheed? It was the belief, and this is the really important thing for us now today, the belief, as Imam Ghazali says, that all things are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have Tawheed, if we're Muslims, we believe everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing comes from anything or anyone else. Allah is in control of everything. This is what Tawheed was, right? Basically ruling out your food and the drink, and anybody can help you. No, only person, only one that can help us. The only support, the only help, the only provider, only sustainer, only giver is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Tawheed. This is to understand the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what Tawheed is. That good and evil come from Allah alone, right? Everything's created by Allah. Nothing else has any independent influence, impact, effect in creation except by the power and might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was Tawheed. Important mention here by Imam Ghazali says, such a thing is a noble station. One of the fruits is tawakkul. So if you have this, you have something called tawakkul, which will be talked about in the book of tawakkul. There's a whole book in Imam Ghazali's 40 books. One of the books is called the book of reliance upon God, the book of depending upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trusting in God. When you say trust in Allah, have tawakkul, this is a whole book, one of the 40 sections. One of them is Kitabut Tawakkul, right? So we're going to go through that later on. But where do we get it from? What's the fruit of Tawheed? Is tawakkul. Scholastic theology doesn't produce tawakkul, it produces arguments. It might produce doubts in some people. There's a famous incident, and I love quoting this incident because it puts things in context. One of the great scholars of scholastic theology, by the way, just because a scholar is a faqih, a jurist in law, or because he's a theologian, doesn't make him a bad person, right? We're not criticizing people. We're not criticizing, just to limit things to certain things is blameworthy. Okay, limiting is blameworthy. So when I'm saying this, I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just saying the incident occurred. That there was a great Imam who was actually a pious Imam and a great man of Allah, wrote books in different subjects and sciences, especially the more intellectual type, logical type of sciences, the ma'qulat as they called. His name was Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, very great Imam of Islam, very great theologian and so forth. And he was very famous and had a big following in his lifetime as well. I think he was prior to Imam Ghazali, slightly or similar time. I think it was slightly before, maybe slightly after. I can't recall the exact dates. But anyway, he was going one day in his following. He had a big following, entourage kind of thing, right? And an old lady was on the street on the side, and they were going past, and she was like, "Why are they all so bothered about this person or what's going on?" So she asked one of the people, "Who is this? What's going on?" So he didn't reply that this is so and so and so and so. He said, "Oh, don't you know who this is? The one that has memorized 2,000 proofs of the existence of God. He knows 2,000 proofs for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." A big thing in those days, and that's what this Tawheed and theology became in that period. So she instantly replied. This is how she replied. She said, "If he didn't have 2,000 doubts, he wouldn't have needed 2,000 proofs." Right? Her iman was solid. She didn't need 2,000 proofs. She was saying to him, "But what's that? 2,000 proofs? You must have 2,000 doubts, right?" And some of the greatest of the theologians, the greatest of scholars. This is reported from several of them. Probably the most famous is the teacher Imam Ghazali, Imam al-Juwayni, the one that was the head of the Madrasa al-Nizamiyya before Imam Ghazali. His teacher, his kind of mentor as well. He said when he on his deathbed, when he was passing away, "Oh Allah, give me the iman, give me the faith of the old ladies. I don't want faith of the theologians. I want the faith of these old ladies, because their faith is solid. They have iman in Allah, that iman that's unshakable. They don't care what people say. Think their attachment to Allah and their belief in God." And this is the great Imams asking for, the great scholars of Islam asking for that type of iman. He didn't say, "Oh Allah, make my iman strong that I built on all this theology I studied and all the intellectual things I did. This really made me strong and firm in my religion. This is the iman I want you to accept." He was begging for that iman, that he knew that there was a stronger form of iman out there that these people had. It's not just ladies and men as well, but obviously sometimes we refer to the ladies in that sense because of their firmness in their ways and their beliefs. So this is what Tawheed became, right? And it became more of a theological debate, basically, right? And that's what the term became used for. But he mentions some examples, Imam Ghazali here. He says, "One of the fruits also has been illustrated by the words of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq when he was asked during his final illness, his sickness that he passed away in, 'Shall we call for you a tabib? Shall we call for you a physician, a doctor, a physician, right? Shall we call for you somebody who can treat you?' He said, 'It was the doctor who made me sick. It was a physician that put me in this state.'" Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By the way, one of the names of Allah is At-Tabib as well. In the hadith, the Prophet said Allah is At-Tabib, the physician. Doctors means knowledgeable person, right? Somebody who's got a lot of knowledge. Physician is a better translation of Tabib, because you can have a doctor or PhD, right, and that kind of thing. And that in Arabic is doctor, by the way. So if somebody's a doctor in Arabic or a doctora, they've got a PhD. If somebody's a tabib, they're a physician, a GP type person, right? You've got to be careful how you use words. That's what we're talking about today. And another example was that when a person fell sick, doesn't mention who, he says, "What has the physician told you about your sickness? Have you been to a physician? And what was he told you about your sickness?" He said, "He has told me, I do as I please. I do as I please." In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, if I'm going to make you ill, I'm going to make you ill. All is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, more examples of this will be in the book of Tawakkul. So that book will talk more about that topic in much more detail, inshallah ta'ala. But now Imam Ghazali, before we go on to the fourth term, right, which is dhikr and tadhkir, this reminder and remembrance and admonition, Imam Ghazali gives a example of Tawheed and what it's really like. So he says, Tawheed is like a precious fruit, parable, analogy, which has two outer skins, qishran, two sort of covers, right? One outside, one slightly inside that. So he said the outer skin, if you can call it that, cover, because it's a fruit, it's skin of a fruit, right? The fancy word I think is used here, I've got, is husk of the fruit, right? And then it's also mentioned there's a core as well, right? There's the lub. In Arabic is the qishar, and the lub is common terms which refer to fruits. So that's the parable, right? The core of the fruit, right? The pulp, or what's inside, the good stuff, right? So the first cover is the profession, the statement, La ilaha illallah. So if you're on the surface of Islam, of Tawheed, which is Islam, right? You've got La ilaha illallah in your life. But there's a problem with this, he said. Which profession is called monotheism, and it's obviously, it negates and takes away polytheism, Trinitarianism and all that kind of thing. So if you've got Tawheed, you've got monotheism, right? But it says here, such a profession, such a statement could come from a hypocrite. So just to have the outward skin, to be on the surface, doesn't mean you have in you or within you what you say any real meaning, right? So the lip service basically is there, right? In the open declaration, that's the outer skin. The inner skin, which is slightly below, represents the state wherein the heart neither opposes nor denies to express the meaning of the statement. So it's in the heart, but it's not resulting in any change. It's not going back or forth, right? It's a belief in the heart, though. That's Iman now. That's a proper Muslim, basically. And that's where everyone stops, including the theologians, including these scholastic theologians. They have the statement of Iman, and yeah, it's in their hearts. But does it have an impact on their faith? Does it have an impact on their actions? Does it have an impact on their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, all the scholastic theology they do, no, it doesn't. That doesn't produce any fruit for that. The inner core, the lub, this core, this inside, is the real belief that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A belief that rules out ever worshipping anything besides Him. A belief that helps you control your passions and desires. And a belief that actually you are subservient to Allah and not your desires, right? Because what does Allah say in the Quran, as Imam Ghazali quotes, have you seen Him who was taken as His ilah, as His God, His hawa, His passions? So if it's not controlling you inside your faith, then your faith isn't, your tawheed isn't really tawheed. It hasn't reached the core because you're following your desires, right? Actually, anyone who would think, anyone who you would think would find out that the idol worshipper worships not the idol but his own passions. Okay, bad translation, like I said. If you would think that the idol worshipper worships idols, no, he's worshipping something even more subservient than that. He's worshipping his passions, and that's why they can't change. It's not that they don't see here is a stone, and the stone has no benefit for me. They're worshipping their passions. They put that first, right? Now, if you're trying to pull somebody away from their passions, that is the hardest thing to do, right? So they don't see rocks and stone and idols and worshipping these images. They see that lust, the desire they have for doing that, and their way of life is the right way of life, and they're not going to leave that personal choice, that personal desire, right? And he says here, because his soul is inclined to the religion of his forefathers, and it follows that inclination, that desire. That's what it is. What's the desire? It's an inclination towards something. So he's following a desire towards his forefathers and what they believe. And this is what Allah criticizes throughout the Quran. Do they not think, or do they just follow their forefathers? Do they not have intellect? Do they not have thought? You're just following blindly those that came before them, right? So the inclination of the soul towards something is a passion, right? And they follow their passion. Whereas Tawheed and believing in that, if it becomes your passion, amazing, great. But really, if you've got a struggle to believe that, that's a struggle of Iman. Get all these other things out of your heart, and only Allah is the one I believe in, and the only one Allah is worthy of worship. That's Tawheed. Tawheed is not just to believe in God, it's to worship God as one, right? Theology, Tawheed, translation as theology, stood for this station, the station of those who truly believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and would not be altered due to what goes on around them. They had this firm control of what was inside them. However, it gives an example here. Says this is like a man who rising in the morning. So he says, example of somebody who professes Tawheed but doesn't really have true Tawheed, is like the example of a man who rises up in the morning and looks towards the Qibla. So you woke up in the morning, you look towards the Qibla, which is the Kaaba direction, and you say, wajjahtu wajhi, is a dua you can say when you wake up. I have turned my face as a Hanif, as somebody who's upright, to the creator of the Samawati, with all the heavens and the earth, the skies and the earth. And the dua continues, right? So he makes this dua as he wakes up. Okay. But his heart is not turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not directing his heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, his face physically is facing the Kaaba. Yes, he's asserting it with his tongue, but where's his heart? It's nothing, he might not even be thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam Ghazali says this, so his dua, first thing of the day, is not the first dua of the day. He started his day off with a lie. This is how he started the day off. So you could do du'as, but if the lack of sincerity or that lack of tawheed is actually making your statement a lie. Imam Ghazali is being very strict here, which he commits, which he's saying against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a lie against Allah. Oh Allah, I've turned my face towards you and you haven't. You're lying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't do that. If he means by the word face, I've turned my face, literally the face, he's saying the truth. If you say, I've turned my face to you, O Allah, and the Kaaba is where we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then okay, you're telling the truth, but that's not the meaning of the dua. When you wake up in the morning, you say, I've turned my face to my Lord, etc. You're talking about your intentions, your beliefs, your actions, your being. The fact still remains that he has not turned it except towards the Kaaba and away from other directions. But the Kaaba does not point towards the creator of the heavens and the earth, so that he who turns his face towards it turns it to God, who is limited by neither direction nor place. If on the other hand he means by it his heart, which is what it should be, and which is the instrument of worship, how could his words be true when his heart is bent upon his worldly desires and affairs? Right? So this is the danger that we have when we don't worship Allah truly. We don't have tawheed. We don't have this true connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll move on to the fourth term, which is dhikr. The fourth term to be altered is the term dhikr or tadhkir. Imam Ghazali mentions. This is the fourth term. This is what I think I was marked here. Yep. Al-lafdhu al-rabi, al-dhikru wa tadhkir. First of all, a hadith is quote of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, when you pass by the gardens of paradise, stop and enjoy yourselves. Right? If you pass by the gardens of paradise, then Riyadul Jannah, then enjoy yourselves. And literally the word says here, farta'u, which means like graze, like you would, right? Graze as in eat, drink, relax. Or being asked what the gardens of paradise were. What are the gardens of paradise, O Messenger of Allah? Ma hiya al-Riyadul Jannah, right? He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, majalisu dhikr, the majlis, the majalis, the gatherings, the places where people sit together to make dhikr. And of course, the famous hadith, which we often quote, well, I often quote in certain talks, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has certain angels that go looking for the gatherings of dhikr. They go around the earth looking for dhikr, the majalis of dhikr, right, where dhikr is taking place. On finding an assembly, a majlis of dhikr, they start calling to all the other angels, come with us, come. We found our need, halummu ila hajatikum, come to your need, come to what you are looking for, right? And all of a sudden, all the angels gather in these gatherings of dhikr. Right? What's dhikr? What's the understanding of dhikr? We're going to talk about that now. So all the angels gather, and then the hadith continues that the people of this gathering are rewarded, are forgiven. Even the people passing by them are forgiven as well. Right? But what was dhikr in that time? And what was it? So what was it in Imam Ghazali's time? Or what was it before Imam Ghazali? Well, before Imam Ghazali's time, he says, dhikr now, he mentions three things. He says it's become qasas, stories, ash'ar, poetry, shatah wa ta'ammat. Shatah and ta'ammat are like crazy statements, heretical statements, or statements that just go beyond the limits of Islam, basically. The shatah means to go beyond the limits. Ta'ammat means like a calamity or a big event that's, destructive. So this is what now dhikr has become, sort of silly statements and, things like this, right? Statements that don't make sense or confuse people and that kind of thing. So storytellers, yep, that's why it became known as dhikr, became storytellers. And Imam Ghazali says here that the storytellers was amongst the first bid'ahs, first innovations. What were storytellers? Basically, there were people that gave admonition in the masajid. They'd sit down, start telling stories, kind of admonishing people. It was entertaining. It was a big thing in the past. They were allowed to do this because as long as they weren't exaggerating, as long as they weren't telling lies and making things up or misguiding people, they were using it for good. It may well be not done before the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was allowed. By the Sahaba, it was allowed, right? The Sahaba, Sayyidina Ali would actually go around when he was in Kufa, in Basra, etc., when he would visit the cities. He'd go around looking at who's at the masajid, and if they were not good people, they'd be stopped, right? They'd be dismissed from telling stories and having gatherings in the masjid. Later on, at this time, Imam Ghazali, to be honest, later on as in that time, and soon after, it became a very big sort of, big like a craze at the time, storytelling. Like today, even public speakers today, right? It's a big craze. The great speech we say. And it was so like, it was like a boxing match basically, right? Or I don't know what to call it in terms of other sports, right? Like a big football match. That they actually booked seats for it, right? They say like they'd make dates on this date. This is the stage. The speaker's going to come and he's going to give a speech. He's going to give a qasas. He's a storyteller. He's going to admonish people. It's going to be entertaining, right? So they'd book the front seats. The front seats. So what somebody would do is go and sit at the front, and he'd wait there all night. Somebody would come lazily, say, "Do you want to sell your seat?" He'd pay to get the front seat and sit at the front, right? This is how they do it. So they reserve seats and they get paid for it, right? This is what happens today, isn't it? This is like sports today.
We invented it.
You sorry? We invented it. That's right. We invented it. I don't know if it's a good thing, but indeed. And because in those days they didn't have speaker systems, so obviously they had massive, they had like gatherings of hundreds of thousands of people, literally football matches. You go to like I don't know, what's the big stadium, the Barcelona game, right, or something like that. They've got a big stadium, right? Fahim, Barcelona got a big stadium. Manchester United got a big stadium as well, but I think Barcelona is bigger. Wembley, yeah, Wembley is good. Let's stick to UK. So imagine trying to fill Wembley up. That's what they did. They had like sellers, ticket sellers, what we call them, and all that kind of thing, and they take commission. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yeah, they had all that, and because they couldn't get, obviously, if you're in the Wembley Stadium, someone's giving a speech in the middle of Wembley Stadium, who's going to hear it, right? So what they had was they didn't have speaker systems or microphones. They had what we call human beings that were like relaying what was said. So at a certain distance, where it wouldn't be disturbing to one side against the other, he'd have the speaker speaking, and then you'd have, after so many sentences, he would repeat everything out loud to those around him. They'd be placed, not one of them, they'd be placed all around to basically make sure the sound reached. And that's not a bad thing, because in Salah in the past, Islam had that if you have a big congregation, then the people at the back, even now if you have a big congregation, you can't hear at the back. What you're supposed to do, somebody's supposed to repeat the takbir out loud, so that obviously the Imam says Allahu Akbar, it might reach like the 10th saf or the 15th saf. People at the back, we can't hear anything. So they can see the movement, but they can't hear anything. So it's a duty of somebody, usually appointed people, at a certain point to say Allah. When the Imam says Allahu Akbar, they repeat Allahu Akbar, so people behind can then make their prostrations and bowing and so forth. So that was done. So they use the same principles, but this is what they did basically. This is what dhikr became. Let's go to a dhikr gathering. Let's go to storytelling, like admonition, entertainment, and pay for it even, right? Pay entries, special seats and everything, right? The qasas. So it became a big thing, and then obviously because it became such a famous, obviously you got notoriety and fame through being a great speaker. And there's some great speakers and great, storytellers. There was they were shut down a bit as well, right? And they were controlled, but it still continued, and it still was a tradition. And I think it still continues to some extent today. Many people make their fame out of speaking, and not necessarily knowledge itself, right? There's a funny incident here. It mentions that once upon a time, I called upon Ibn Sirin, and Ibn Aoun says this. These are early Muslims. Ibn Sirin is a famous dream interpreter. And I asked him what's happening today, because the governor of the city has stopped storytellers from telling their stories. So he's banned them, right? Because the governor, like I said, they had control over them. So Ibn Sirin said, that's good. Alhamdulillah, Ibn Sirin was a scholar, right? He's good, pious scholar. Once A'mash, who was again an early great scholar and pious man, entered the main mosque of Basra. Basra was one of the main towns of Iraq in that day. And when he went into the main mosque, he heard a qasas, a storyteller. And as he saw the qasas, he was ignoring him, wasn't too bothered about him. But then all of a sudden he heard him say, A'mash says this in his like speech, and this was A'mash himself. So he was like, what's going on? He's quoting me. So he went to the middle of the masjid, it says here, and he started plucking his hairs of his armpit out. He says it here, right? So the speaker, the Qasas, he said, "Oh, old man, are you not ashamed to do that in the masjid? Like, what are you doing for? What are you doing this for?" And he said, Amash said, "Why should I be ashamed? I'm doing something according to the laws of Islam. It's a practice that's been mentioned, always not in public, but while what you have been saying and doing is outright lie." He was lying in his speech. You're lying. So, you're breaking the laws of Islam because I am Amash. I know I didn't say what you just said I said, right? So you're lying, and you can't stand on the minbar there and speak to people with lies. So I want to teach him a lesson, basically, and say that against him. So this is what, unfortunately, dhikr became, right? It became speeches, basically, embellishing your speech with reminders. So this is what tadhkir means. Dhikr means to remember Allah, but tadhkir means to admonish and to remind others. And this basically became, this is why it became, basically. And also, dhikr became, so the dhikr you do yourself became more like entertaining statements that you make. I want to recite this because it's rhymes. So rhyming du'as basically became popular. And they're always popular, and some of the du'as of the Prophet are rhyming to some extent, but it became a big thing, rhyming in every dua you make, rhyming every time. Even now, sometimes the Imam makes a rhyming dua, I think, oh, that was nice, right? So it's got his role, but it became a big thing. It became just like constantly, this is what people are looking for and saying, and it became almost, and then they went from this, they went into poetry, which was mentioned, they went into singing and audition, as it's called, listening to songs and music and so forth. And Imam Ghazali has a section on that in the Ihya Ulumuddin. So he mentions that we will go into, from poetry, he went on to obviously listen to poetry. Again, that was not something praiseworthy, except for what contains wisdom and except what we learn from. So Prophet said, there is in poetry wisdom, not in all poetry, in some poetry. But really, poetry is language. So for the general public, they don't understand poetry, they can't grasp it, it's not for everyone. Although we say poetry is popular, it's popular amongst people who've studied and learned, it's not popular amongst the masses. They want to listen, they don't want to read, and they don't understand poetry, and the metaphors and parables and the figurative language in poetry is not for everyone. It takes some understanding and interpretation of poetry, right? And that was the problem, that, poetry was said, people get, oh, what amazing poetry, but they're just not really that understanding of what it means. And they're more into, and that led into the more rhythmic kind of thing, which led into, things like that. So Imam Ghazali says here, he says, poetry whose outward meaning dealt with people would be of any harm because, as it will be seen in the book of audition and music, a person would always interpret all that he would hear according to the light which dominates his heart. So when you hear all these things, and a lot of them are parables mentioning certain things, etc., whatever state you're in, you're going to interpret it in that way. And not many people are in the right state to interpret it. Hence, many of the scholars who did quote poetry and were into that kind of thing didn't do it for the public. They kept it very private to people of understanding, because in poetry you can convey a lot of meanings and it's good, but it has its time and place, and so the scholars were careful what they released to the public, and etc. And then it talks about this concept of, within this section on dhikr, talks about this concept of ash-shatahat, and these sort of crazy sayings, or sayings that go beyond the limit of the Sharia, which translation here is ecstatic utterances, mentioned by some of the so-called Sufis, and how they are against the Sharia, of course. That led to many statements, even to the extent that some of these people said statements that they claimed they were Allah, or that they had united with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they talk about their ishq of God, their love of God, their excessive love of God, their connection to Allah, and they make statements that are just crazy, it's hard to find an interpretation for them, and this was a problem among some of the people at the time. Now that's a long topic, to be honest, and I wanted to get through it today, but I've just seen the clock, and I think it's good to actually give that a whole section in itself and give that time. One of the people mentioned here was killed for his statements, was executed. A famous man, pious man of Allah, but of course controversial as well in the fact that he was executed for his statement. He said, I am the truth, I am Allah, I am Allah. His name was Hussein ibn Mansur al-Hallaj. Some of you may have come across the name al-Hallaj and who he was and what he did and etc. If you look at it, a lot of it was political. We'll talk about his story because he's mentioned by Imam Ghazali here, the story of Hallaj, and also other statements of some of the early Muslims that were beyond the limits of the Sharia or hard to understand, and how do we go with that and etc. And that is part of the dhikr. The dhikr became a part of this. This is dhikr basically. It's not. This is something we need to avoid and stay away from. And we'll talk about that next week, to be honest. These shatahat, we used to hear about them often. There's a book, books written on this. Like these are some of the crazy statements you find amongst people which are kufr, which are wrong, etc. So you need to be careful about these kind of things, these utterances, let's call them. I think they call it vagaries of speech. Vagaries of speech. One translation I've come across for that term. The shatahat al-Sufiya, or the vagaries of the Sufis, right, or some of the Sufis. And that leads us to a further level, which was an area that Imam Ghazali actually dealt with directly himself, which was the Batiniya. He's actually got a book against them called Fada'ih al-Batiniya, the disgraces of the Batiniya. Who are the Batiniya? The Batiniya are those who only believe in inner interpretation, the esoteric, as they call it, the inner interpretation. They didn't believe in literal stuff, they didn't believe outwardly, they interpret everything inwardly. So Imam Ghazali exposed that or talked against that in his book Fada'ih al-Batiniya. And the big ones at that time, they were what they were called, you look into history, they were called the Ismailis. They were the lead in the Batiniya movement at the time, and later on had a big influence over that land, which is the land of Persia now. That's where Imam Ghazali is from, he's Persian, he's from that land. At that time it was orthodox and so forth, but later on a lot of deviant groups came in. Among them was the Ismailis, and Imam Ghazali wrote against them in his time. A few centuries later, things had changed drastically within that region, and not for the good, to be honest. And it caused a lot of problems that even the Ottomans had to deal with, and kind of things like that. The Safavids and so forth. That if you learn history, you read about it, it's all written and well known. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about these people and what happened and the Batiniya. Because mentioned here, it's actually mentioned by Imam Ghazali, the Batiniya, and he mentions an example of the interpretation of the story of Fir'aun and Musa in the Quran, and how they interpreted Fir'aun to mean this, and that we can't do that because Fir'aun is a real person, Musa was a real person. We can't start making these figurative extracting things that don't exist. And he wrote a book on the whole topic, but he gives one example here. So it's a long section to go through this idea of this sort of misunderstanding of just generally words now, and it comes from pious, so-called pious or spiritual people. We need to be very careful around that and avoid it, and stick to the Sharia, right? And go back to where I think we mentioned it a few times. There's a balance. Too much fiqh can lead to that hard-heartedness, yes, and too much spirituality, meaning no fiqh accompanied with it, can lead to that heresy, basically. You're going just crazy statements and crazy ideas that are not controlled anymore by the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to find a balance. That's why Imam Ghazali gives us in this book, is 40 books, it's a long more to come. What he's setting the tone for, that this is where we're heading towards. It's a balance, right? We're the ummah of wasat. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We have made you a balanced ummah, a moderate ummah, of the middle path, not extremes. And extremism in most of its manifestations produces ugly things, and it's not nice, right? Polarization is not good. We need to have balance. So we'll talk more about that. So next week's topic is kind of defined. We've gone into it a bit there. We're going to more depth and give the examples, and we'll continue with the fifth term, which we didn't get to, which was hikmah, wisdom. We'll talk about that as well, philosophy, wisdom, and so forth. And then that ends that actual section. We'll finish with that last fifth thing. But that's not a problem. We've got a full topic for next week. And we can continue from there, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We've only got 2 minutes for questions today because I've gone over by 10. So I'll give you 2 minutes. So that means 2 questions. One from the brother's side, one from the sister's side. So ladies first. Any questions? No? Okay, brothers? No.
Quick question in there, just on this balance. If you feel like you're going in terms of, you feel like you're in balance, so how do you check to see if you are in balance, or Are you going too much to the spiritual side or too much to the Sharia side? Or how do you maintain or keep sort of like self-accountability in terms of, is it something
That's a tough question.
experience?
Tough question.
Is it some personal
So if I'll give you a very like cliche standard type answer, which is follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and but really it just depends, because there are certain times you need to have a predominant side of spirituality and be away from the world and give yourself time to develop and just be work on yourself. But there are certain times you need to really learn the laws of Islam and practice them and make sure you know them all. And at that time, you might be actually giving a lot more attention to the laws and details of that, and lesser time to the practice of it. So it just depends where you are in your life. I think that's an answer, I suppose. So everyone's different on their spiritual journey, their journey to Allah. Part of it's spiritual, part of it's laws, and etc. So depending on where you are, and where you are, how well developed you are, how much guidance you have, and there's many factors to it. People around you, where you live in the world can have an impact. Like spirituality is hard in this part of the world, right? You go out to the wilderness and the Islamic countries, some Islamic countries, not all of them, the good ones, right? The ones that have a bit more freedom. Then you find a lot more easier to do the dhikr, to do the Quran, to pray, and you can feel the impact of it. Because I think the problem here is the negative stuff that's in our face. We see that so much. Like I went to Malaysia. March, not to show off or anything, mashallah. Went to Malaysia for a good thing, to Islamic events and stuff, and alhamdulillah, we went to a few things. We went to Sheikh Jibreel Haddad of Lebanon, he was there as well. He's in Brunei, so you may know Sheikh Jibreel. We met him there in Malaysia. We went to attend his event, which was against extremism, and he wrote a new book against burning people in jihad is not allowed, etc. But at the time, I had a friend from Syria, who's from Malaysia, and Allah bless him, he flew from his town, because Malaysia is a massive place, so I was in Kuala Lumpur, right? And obviously we just go there and we just book a hotel and we stay there, and so he came to the hotel, and may Allah reward him, he travelled for a long time, and I got an aeroplane to get there basically, and mashallah, he travelled for several hours to see a friend of his from Syria, so a beautiful reward for him, inshallah ta'ala. And we had a good time and spent a whole day together and stuff. But where we stayed was just central Kuala Lumpur, right? It was just normal to us. He was, Ya Sheikh, Fasad, Ya Sheikh, Haram, Ya Sheikh, where are you staying? And I'm like, yeah, in the UK we're desensitized to this kind of stuff. It was bad, it was like all the rubbish you'd get in a major city like New York or London. We were there and we didn't feel it because we're kind of accustomed to it, unfortunately, right? We see on the streets for us, right? So I was thinking to myself, if he came to the UK, he'd be there. But that's the problem, that he doesn't live in Kuala Lumpur. He lives in one of the villages, islands outside, which is like a more of village life and stuff. Mashallah, he's doing well. He's head of his village. He's a great scholar there, mashallah, teaching and writing books as well. Mashallah, he's very active. So yeah, he was shocked with the environment. So that's what I mean. Now for him, spirituality is a lot easier where he lives. For us, we need a lot more hard work and protection, I suppose, right? So what level of spirituality or what we do, etc. It just depends on our situations. There's no one answer to that. Yeah. Thank you very much for today. Inshallah, we'll carry on next week. Just a few announcements. We have our volunteers appreciation dinner. I hope some of you will be recognized in that. If not, please attend. Free food, basically. That's this Saturday at 2:00 till about 3:00, half 3. We're going to do a presentation. We're going to recognize the different teams, the health and well-being team. There's the Burda night team. There's the Tarbiyah team on Saturdays. There's the Isnad classes. There's people who do lots of stuff with Guidance Hub. So we want to have a party with everyone and recognize them. And also, Brother Sajid. Some of you may know Brother Sajid. MashaAllah, he's moving on. And we're going to have a farewell party for Brother Sajid. You'll know Brother Sajid, I'm sure, with long hair, the brother with long hair. Inshallah, to bigger and better things. I don't know where that is without Guidance Hub, though. MashaAllah. But he's working hard now, that's a good thing. And then we also have our Discovery Day earlier that day. So if you can come on Saturday morning to our classes, anybody and everybody is welcome just to drop in, sit in to any class. We've got 2-3 classes running from 9:00 in the morning, or 9:15, till 1 p.m. We've got 4 classes. We've got 7 classes that you can attend on different topics like fiqh, like etiquettes, like beliefs, the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And also our teachers will be here. Ustaz Ali will be here, and Sheikh Al-Nashin, and myself. The day after, on the 27th, on the Sunday, is the intensive. Ali, you're coming to the intensive? Please. You're not working, are you?
Inshallah not.
You'd love it. Ustaz Ali is the kind of person you'd like. He's really, because you fired the questions last time, right? He loves questions. I don't know if you guys have seen him on Instagram, Ustaz Muhammad Ali. He's like question after question after question. And so he's going to be on Sunday the 27th of January, this coming Sunday, inshallah. And we're going to do a one-day intensive on the fiqh of prayer. So the rules of prayer, what breaks prayer, how do you establish prayer, etc., etc., etc. Direction of Qibla, purification before prayer, the kind of things that relate to prayer itself, and that kind of thing. Performing the prayer and question answer is a big part of it. That's the whole day really. That's a full day seminar from 10:30 in the morning till about 5:30, 6 in the evening. Lunch is provided. More details are available on www.guidancehub.org, or come and speak to us at reception and ask about that, inshallah. And we also have Inshad, which is Islamic chanting singing classes for boys, starting on Sunday the 3rd of Feb, so the following Sunday, not this Sunday. That is different timings, but the first class, which is starting Sunday the 3rd, is at 1:30. And there's going to be a second class starting 2 weeks later. That's going to start, I think, about 3 o'clock. There's going to be 2 classes. But this is, so this is, I think, 8 plus. So it's 8 onwards. And this is the beginners class. I think the second class they're going to set up is not intermediate, but the second class, because some boys that did it before, about 15, 20, they're going to do a second class for them, but they're starting later. This is a new intake, so brand new students, brand new children, 8 plus boys are welcome to sign up for February the 3rd. It's a Sunday, so every Sunday on from February the 3rd at 1:30, it's like an hour singing training led by Brother Basim, who's mashallah, a good vocalist and has several years of experience and training with actual, Islamic singers from around the Muslim world. He's traveled out to different places like Morocco and other places. To be trained, and he leads the dhikr here on Thursdays as well, so he's very good, mashallah. So that's a really good one to get involved in. But the one I'd like you to really come out of all of this is the volunteers dinner. Just come and have some food. That's the best one, isn't it? That's the one that's got food with it, right? So volunteers dinner. They haven't got one announcement on here, which is the Burda night. Right? Can't believe they didn't have it. Yeah, the Burda night. So this Saturday for the ladies, I should turn this way. Especially they haven't got it. Honestly, they haven't got it on here. They should have. Burda night is 6:30 till about 9. It's probably about 9:30, 10, but you can leave early if you want. 6:30 for the ladies. There's a special night, spirituality night with Sheikh Anoshin Gul, where they go through the Kitab Burda, they recite the poem, they recite some Arabic naats, Urdu naats, English naats, and so forth. And they have food as well, and they have a reminder by Sheikh Anoshin. And we get a massive turnout, alhamdulillah. How much ladies do we get roughly? I've heard we get like 300.
When it's like
That's what I thought. When it's like a big event or bigger month, or there's something going on like, Rabi al-Awwal or something like that, they get a big turnout. But yeah, they get a good turnout, mashallah. So for your lady folk, if you want them to come on this Saturday, even not happening on Saturday, we've got open day, we've got volunteers dinner, free food. We've got for the ladies, they've got Burda night after that. So yeah, make your Saturdays free this week, everyone, please. This Saturday is here, inshallah. Anything about that you wanted to ask somebody? No?
I was just going to ask about the zikr that you do on Thursdays, obviously you do it for the men.
Yes.
Is there ever going to be anything for the
So that Burda night is for a similar thing. But on Mondays, they do have a dhikr locally. If you want to speak. Yeah, so the sister will give you details. And because Sheikh Anoshin has moved to Manchester, they are looking to make it more at the centre and more regular and open it to the public. It's open to the public at the moment, but it's just not as advertised as much. But it will be shortly, inshallah, because Sheikh Anoshin is local now. I can't tell you where she lives, but if you see a car somewhere, then you know where she lives. But yeah, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. See you all next week. Assalamu alaikum. Sorry? When you said